Hi, I'm Jamie Poisson. In the wake of the killing of Hezbollah's longtime leader, Hassan Nasrallah, in a massive airstrike in Beirut on Friday, experts immediately talked about how his death was a watershed moment that could reshape the Middle East. My guest today, Kareem Shaheen, the former Middle East correspondent for The Guardian out of Lebanon and the current Middle East editor for New Lines magazine, has written that his death is more significant than both Osama bin Laden and Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. We're going to talk about why he thinks that is and put it in the wider context of a series of fatal blows to Israel's enemies. Where does this leave the Axis of Resistance, which is the Iran-backed political and military coalition across the region working in opposition to Israel? And of course, we are going to speak about the fate of the Palestinians. Kareem, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's great to have you. So let's start with the death of Hassan Nasrallah. Can you tell me a bit more about Nasrallah's significance as a political and cultural figure in Hezbollah and Lebanon?
Sure. Yeah. As we said in the piece that you mentioned, Hassan Nasrallah is probably the most significant militia leader in the region. He's probably the most significant Arab leader to take up the fight against Israel. He obviously became Secretary General of Hezbollah in 1992.
He was Hezbollah's longest-serving Secretary General, taking over at the age of 32 when his predecessor, Abbas al-Musawi, was killed by Israeli missiles in 1992.
And he really was the soul of Hezbollah. He created the machinery of the party as it currently exists. He was the linchpin of Iran's power projection in the region. He led the most powerful militia that was allied with it. They had such a presence throughout Lebanon and beyond that, as Iran sought to expand Hezbollah's experience and power and influence across the border. They were instrumental in keeping Syrian President Bashar al-Assad in power when they intervened in the war there in 2013.
The resistance can't stand with its arms folded while its back's broken. If Syria falls in the hands of the US, the Israelis and the Takfiris, then the resistance will be besieged.
They also, trained and taught some of their tactics and strategies to other Iranian-affiliated militias in the region, including in Iraq and in Yemen. So they really spread their influence far and wide. But Nasrallah himself was a very significant figure culturally and historically in the region as well. We compared him in our essay to Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian former president.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, he's, and it's true that Nasser lost every single war he entered into, and Nasrallah, caused great suffering and misery in Lebanon.
Even before involvement in the war in Syria, Nasrallah failed to convince many in the Sunni Muslim Arab world that his movement was not behind the assassination of Lebanon's former Prime Minister Rafiq al-Hariri in 2005. His critics say his political muscle came from the group's weapons, which were used against domestic opponents in 2008.
And as recently as a couple of years ago, they besieged Syrian civilians. They starved them to death in parts of Syria in the campaign. And yet, back in 2006, when Nasrallah fought against Israel during the war between them and Israel at the time, he was the most popular Arab leader. And the reason is because he traded or he claimed to trade in this currency of dignity, where he was standing up to Israel, the only Arab force to actually stand up to Israel. And they banked on that as a key element of their popularity and as a key element of their legitimacy. And this continued, outside of Lebanon. He was seen as this, figure who was fighting against Israeli aggression. Up until he entered the war in Syria alongside Bashar al-Assad. And that's really when, across the region, the perception of him began to turn from this, hero of resistance against Israel to essentially just another militia gang leader who was fighting against aggrieved Sunnis all over the Middle East.
Nasrallah's supporters saw him as a defender of the rights of Shias, but his critics said he was Iran's man who never shied away from showing allegiance to Tehran and its religious authority.
What about since October 7th?
Yeah, so we make this point in the essay that over the past year it was kind of a return to the party's roots. As a party that was primarily created to fight against Israel's occupation of Lebanon, and in solidarity with Gaza. He was able to wage essentially the longest war that any Arab force has waged against Israel for almost 12 months. After the Hamas terrorist attacks against Israeli civilians in October 7th, Hezbollah said that they would open a northern front against Israel, partly out of solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza, but also as a way to pin down some Israeli forces in the north, that would not be diverted to the war in Gaza. And they succeeded for quite some time. They caused a massive displacement of Israeli citizens who were living in the north and who moved out due to the relentless Hezbollah rockets.
The enemy knows that there will be a single place inside Israel away from our missiles. It will not be sporadic missiles. It will be targeted missiles that will drop.
But they also brought retribution on their own civilians and their own constituents who were living in those areas, because Israel returned, fire with fire. But the thing that they were banking on was that this game that they had been playing with the Israelis since 2006 of controlled escalations, controlled kind of cross-border attacks, would not spiral out of control, and that they would, get a chance to dial it down once a ceasefire deal was reached in Gaza. Except what Israel did was change the rules of the game, and they went all out.
So it was a miscalculation.
Absolutely, yes. It was definitely
on Hezbollah's part, on Nasrallah's part.
Definitely.
What does this mean for Hezbollah now?
Well, that's the big question now. Israel's operation, setting aside the brutality of the bombings so far in Lebanon, it's really important to point out that 1 million civilians have been displaced by the ongoing bombardment of South Lebanon and of South Beirut and of other parts of Beirut as well. Also, the number of people who've died so far.
In Lebanon, health authorities reported dozens of civilian deaths as Israeli warplanes struck what it said were Hezbollah targets in the south, bringing the death toll from the past 2 weeks to over 1,000 killed.
Which rivals the number of people who were killed in the 2006 war, which took a whole month. But as for Hezbollah, Israel has learned that violence actually works. They've assassinated the top echelons of Hezbollah's leadership.
Well, the Israeli military says it's killed a commander of Hezbollah in Lebanon in an airstrike. Mohammed Nimar Nasser is one of the most senior Hezbollah figures to have been killed in nearly 9 months of cross-border clashes.
The pager attack, targeted thousands of the party's cadres and, maimed and wounded many of them, in addition to the civilians who were wounded in the attacks. They've compromised Hezbollah's communications networks. They clearly have, spies on the ground that are able to give them accurate information to the point where they're able to pinpoint Hassan Nasrallah's exact location, and able to assassinate him. It's unclear at the moment how much of Hezbollah's leadership actually remains. But what is certain is that whoever replaces Nasrallah is not going to have the same power over the populace, or frankly has his force of personality. So whoever replaces him is going to be an unpredictable figure.
And no one has been named yet. Is that right?
So the expectation at the moment is that his cousin Hashim Safiuddin, who was a senior leader of Hezbollah, is going to take over in his stead. And he's believed to be a more violent figure, a figure who's more likely to, escalate rocket bombardment of Israel. But what's clear at the moment is that the party needs a breather, essentially, in order to regroup and sort of reestablish its communications lines, reestablish its command structure. They've genuinely been decapitated, and so this is a huge intelligence coup for Israel. But and people are fond of often saying that these movements, they don't disappear purely because you killed a leader. But I think the leader in question here is truly an irreplaceable figure in the party structure. What is clear to me, though, is that further escalation of all this is just going to give another raison d'être for the next version of the party. I think it's going to depend on what Israel deems to be its measure of success here. If they decide that a ground incursion is necessary to establish this line, are they going to remain in South Lebanon? That's definitely going to trigger an opposition movement, a resistance movement to the occupation. Are they going to keep bombing Hezbollah depots and weapons facilities and things like that? Is Hezbollah going to withdraw its forces from Syria and bring them back home to Lebanon to launch some sort of counterattack? They're definitely going to want to seek some sort of retribution for the assassination of their leadership. So it's all really up in the air right now.
Hezbollah, I know as you've laid out, is very weakened right now. But they are heavily armed, right? They do have quite a bit of capacity to strike back here, at some point. Is that fair for me to say?
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, they had the largest rocket arsenal of any of Iran's militias. They've been obviously training for operations against Israel for years, for the next conflict that was, going to be an inevitability, really. And so they definitely have the weapons. I mean, Israel has been pursuing a campaign of bombing a lot of their facilities, and it's not entirely clear how much of it has been destroyed, but it's clear that some portion of it has been destroyed. And obviously Hezbollah has also used a significant portion of its arsenal, throughout the past year, in their bombing campaign against northern Israel. So it's not entirely clear how much of their arsenal remains. But the challenge, obviously, is for them is that there doesn't seem to be an existing command structure to direct the flow of these weapons and what they're supposed to target. And in addition, Israeli air superiority is such that they're capable of preventing the influx of further weaponry and arms coming from either directly from Iran or over the border. And also, there's the added factor of the fact that the bombing campaign hasn't really worked. I mean, it's worked in the sense that it's driven a lot of Israelis out of northern Israel. But it hasn't succeeded in kind of limiting Israel's operation in Gaza. Israel continued to bomb Gaza. Israel continued to proceed with its attempts to dismantle Hamas over there.
Yes, it isn't achieving its objective, which is what they said that it was supposed to do.
Exactly. Yeah. So the question would be, what is the point of pursuing further bombardment that will invite Israeli reprisals and retribution on their own constituents as well, who are being forced to flee the south and South Beirut and seek shelter, elsewhere.
I want to talk to you about the regional implications here. So Hezbollah is thought of as the crown jewel in Iran's so-called axis of resistance. What does this mean for Iran specifically?
Yeah, I mean, it's not entirely clear that Iran is going to do anything about it. Quite frankly, they're not in a position, obviously, to open, a full-scale war against Israel. Israel has demonstrated, through their bombing of the Houthis in Yemen as well, that Iranian facilities are also within reach, and honestly, the Israeli leadership is so unstable in terms of their willingness to use violence that it wouldn't be out of the question for them to, bomb Iran, like in response to any perceived attempt to, open another front against Israel. And it's not entirely clear what Iran can actually do. I think the challenge is that Iran has really been exposed as a paper tiger as a consequence of this operation against Hezbollah. Back in 2020, the Trump administration assassinated Qasem Soleimani, right, who was one of the top military leaders in Iran, and was the key linchpin in Iran's external operations in Syria and Iraq in particular.
Last night, at my direction, the United States military successfully executed a flawless precision strike that killed the #1 terrorist anywhere in the world, Qasem Soleimani.
Trump made a big mistake. He killed our hero.
Cries drowned out by angry chants. Soleimani, a beloved figure in Iran, seen as standing up to the West. Now, his death and the way it was carried out, a game changer for Iran and the United States.
And, it was such a provocative operation at the time that it was an option that had been presented to American and even Israeli leaders for a long time. And they continuously turned it down until they didn't. And they did it, and they killed Soleimani. There was no significant fallout from it. Recently, they Israel assassinated Ismail Haniyeh, right, the political leader of Hamas, in an apartment building in Tehran. And people predicted, the potential for a regional war again, and nothing happened.
Yeah, and just I'll mention for our listeners, Israel hasn't claimed responsibility for the death of Haniyeh, but it's widely believed that they were behind it. And then in April of this year, too, Israel struck the Iranian embassy in Syria, killing several IRGC officers. And Iran did respond, right? But it was widely thought of as pretty tepid. Do you think that this could be any different?
Yeah, I mean, the key aspect here is the weight of the figure that has been assassinated. I think we mentioned in our piece that when Hezbollah entered the war in Syria alongside Bashar al-Assad, they saw it as an existential question. That without Syria, this axis of resistance could crumble. But without Nasrallah, it's bound for complete collapse. Nasrallah was in many ways central figure of this axis. The person who took it upon himself to actually engage Israel in combat, and and created this halo around Hezbollah that they were almost invincible, and they believed their own rhetoric, and it likely contributed to their arrogance and their sense of invincibility that allowed Israel to destroy them so much. After Qasem Soleimani died, even though he was working within the system that Iran had established, his loss was felt across Iran's operations in Syria and in Iraq. Nasrallah is an even more titanic figure in this dynamic and in this context.
Let's come back to the U.S. For a moment. So, immediately after Nasrallah's assassination, you hear people talking about how this is yet another humiliation for the United States. And just elaborate for me a little bit more on why that is.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are sort of deluding themselves into thinking that the U.S. is an honest broker in this sort of situation.
This was my follow-up question for you, so I feel like you're going straight there.
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. has pretended to be pushing Israel to, towards a ceasefire in Gaza for the past year.
We should have a ceasefire now. Thank you.
So let me say, I have been clear. Now is the time to get a ceasefire deal and get the hostage.
And obviously, to no real effect or or they haven't truly achieved any of those goals, if those goals were in fact goals that they've been trying to pursue. Israel is so contemptuous of the U.S. and of U.S. policymakers, that to be entirely honest with you, it's really difficult to perceive the U.S. as anything more than a bit player in the dynamics that are currently unfolding. When Nasrallah was killed, there was an initiative that was backed by the U.S. and France to put into effect a ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. In fact, the Israelis bombed an area outside of the southern suburbs on the same day that the French foreign minister was visiting, to try and resolve the crisis. So Israel is completely contemptuous of any attempts to kind of rein back the violence that is unfolding in the region. The U.S. keeps saying that it wants everybody to avoid a regional war, when the bombs that Israel used to kill Nasrallah, were 2,000-pound bunker buster bombs that were provided by the U.S. They're American bombs.
No one wants to see escalation. No one wants to see a wider regional conflict.
Right now, our main challenge is preventing a broader war, one that actually won't solve the challenge that Israel has.
All-out war in the Middle East be avoided? It has to be. We really have to avoid it. We've already taken precautions.
To anyone, to any objective observer, to anyone who's kind of looking at things from the outside in, it seems entirely logical that the U.S. has in its hands the keys to, halting this, which is, we're just going to cut off the weapons and the guns that are being used to bomb Israel's neighbors.
Yeah. I wonder if I could throw at you a bit of a counterpoint. And I don't mean this to say that the U.S. wants what has been happening in Gaza, the catastrophic devastation that's been happening in Gaza. But is there a scenario in here in which, either by accident or intention, this is also what the United States wants, which is the weakening of their enemies too, Hezbollah, Iran, the Houthi,
Absolutely. I mean, I don't think
Hamas. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think the U.S. is going to look sadly upon the demise of Hassan Nasrallah, and the dismantling of Hezbollah's leadership. Hezbollah carried out the U.S. embassy bombings back in 1983.
I'll be going to Andrews Air Force Base to meet one of our Air Force planes, bringing home 16 Americans who died this week in the terrorist attack on the United States Embassy in Beirut.
A suicide bomber in a truck had breached security. On board, an estimated 6 tons of explosives. 220 Marines were killed that day, 18 more from the Navy, 3 from the Army.
Some of the figures that have been killed in the course of Israel's campaign are figures that the U.S. Has been hunting for decades. So I'm sure they're pleased with the outcome of the weakening of a party that wasn't just threatening to American and Israeli interests, but to the interests of America's Gulf Arab allies. Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates. These countries were vehemently opposed to Hezbollah and to its ideology and to Iran's power projection in the region more broadly. For them, Nasrallah's assassination is a net positive for the region. The difficulty is, for someone who's an observer of the region or someone who cares about Lebanon, Hezbollah has carried out a lot of crimes. A lot of people in Lebanon also despise them. But this is an opportunity right now with Hezbollah weakened for everyone to come together to try and create a post Hezbollah Lebanon, to take the opportunity to empower civil society, to empower non-corrupt political figures, and to empower the Lebanese military and sovereign Lebanese security services. To try and wrest back control over the country and its sovereignty. But it's very difficult for that to occur. Whether because of the fact that Hezbollah survives, whether it's because a ground invasion is likely to unite people against Western powers, against Israel and its Western backers. And because violence begets violence, you continue to cause this immense amount of suffering and displacement, and it's unlikely that you end up finding a political solution to a crisis like this one.
Yeah, I saw the Jordanian foreign minister talking about
the amount of damage that Israeli government has done. 30 years of efforts to convince people that peace is possible. This Israeli government killed it. The amount of dehumanization, hatred, bitterness will take generations to navigate through. So ultimately, the question
it's just really stuck with me, that comment that he made at the United Nations. If you don't mind, Kareem, I'll throw one more question at you before we go, which is, I think, one of the most pressing questions here. Is what do you think these latest escalations mean for the Palestinians?
My fear is that this outbreak of violence, this immense carnage and brutality that took place in Gaza, and that is unfolding now in Lebanon, is something that is going to stay with Arab publics for a very, very long time. This isn't something that just it's the latest in a series of what a lot of Arabs feel are indignities visited upon them, not just by Israel, but by the international community writ large. There's a sense that Arab lives are absolutely and utterly worthless in the eyes of the international community, and this is not something that goes away. That's a feeling that persists with the society and with the community, and it creates many Hezbollahs. It creates. If you're one of the people who lost family members to one of these bombings, whether in Gaza or in Lebanon, why wouldn't you fight back? Why wouldn't you seek some sort of retribution? So I fear that the violence that's occurring right now is going to end up contributing to further paroxysms of violence across the region. And to the distancing, and we're going farther and farther away from any possibility of peace for the Palestinians, and that's just going to perpetuate the misery that we've been experiencing in very condensed form over the past year.
Okay, Kareem, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right, that is all for today. I'm Jamie Poisson. Thanks so much for listening. Talk to you tomorrow.